maybe the scary thing is actually not if they hate us, but what if they're just indifferent? What if they're apathetic? Not good. Not good.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Your Ghost Stories. We've had a big jump in listeners and followers recently, so if you're new here, thanks for checking the show out. We hope you're enjoying it as much as we're enjoying creating it.
We are totally independent, self-funded, and new to podcasting, but up against some corporate giants and other awesome podcasts. We recently reached 35 in the UK Apple podcast chart, and it's all down to you guys. We couldn't do it without you. Currently, it costs us to keep this podcast running, but just for the price of a coffee, you can click the link at the bottom of this show and help us keep the show running smoothly. You can also find the support the show link on our website.
Do you want to join us on the show and share your own ghost story perhaps? Or are you keen to learn more about us? Then please visit our website, yourghoststoriespodcast.com.
Our guest today has dedicated his life to unraveling the mysteries that lurk in the shadows, bringing them to the forefront of our understanding through his unparalleled work as a podcaster, author, and storyteller.
With over 65 million downloads, you've likely heard his captivating voice and storytelling prowess on his renowned podcasts, where he delves into everything from ghostly encounters to extraterrestrial mysteries.
He's a household name among paranormal enthusiasts and has a legion of devoted fans eagerly awaiting his next chilling tale or intriguing interview. Today, we have the privilege of delving into his own remarkable journey and experiences in the world of the unknown.
So, without further ado, please join me in extending a warm welcome to America's most popular paranormal podcaster, the one and only Jim Harold.
Your ghost stories. Your ghost stories.
Jim, it's a true pleasure to have you here, and we can't wait to dive into the world you've spent a lifetime exploring. So welcome to Your Ghost Stories.
Oh, well, so glad to speak with both of you. Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it. Look forward to talking about some spooky stuff.
So firstly, can you tell our listeners a little bit about you and what you do?
Well, I am a professional podcaster from the standpoint that I make a living from it. I've been doing it full-time as my full-time job for 11 years. I podcast on the paranormal. I started in 2005 with a show called The Paranormal Podcast, which I continue to do to this day. And then in 2009, I started Jim Harold's Campfire, is a show that people call in and share their spooky stories. And I have some other podcasts. And again, been doing it 11 years full time, talking about spooky stuff, pretty much 52 weeks a year. And really enjoy it and really grateful for the opportunity to help people share their spooky stories and get information out about these fascinating topics.
What got you into the subject of the paranormal? Was it through an experience, or is it something that's always sort of the topic intrigued you?
Well, there's a couple different things. First of all, and I'm quite a bit older than you guys, but in the States here in the 70s, and I was very, very young. I was like in elementary school, like 6, 7 years old, but there was a show called In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy of Star Trek fame. And I started watching that. And then there were a couple of family stories. I can share one of them with you if you'd like. A couple family stories that I heard from like as long as I could remember. And they never changed. Those stories never changed. So I think kind of that combination with some family stories and that TV show. Then later on, the States, we had Unsolved Mysteries, which was, I love that show. And read as much as I could. And when 2005, I wanted to start a podcast, decided to start podcasting. I'm like, what am I going to podcast on? And I ran through all these different ideas. I thought, the one thing that always fascinates me every time I get on a computer and looking stuff up, or I'm going into a bookshop or a library, I go right to that paranormal section. So let's do a podcast on the paranormal. And that's kind of how it got started. And the interesting thing to me is I'm still just as interested in it as I ever was. And I'm just or more mystified by it. I thought in 6 months I'd have all the answers. I'd be like way back in 2005. I'm like, by the time 2006 rolls around, I'll have all this stuff figured out. No, I've got more questions than I did when I started.
Before we move into your own family stories or your own stories, as one of the OG paranormal podcasters, in the 18 years that you've been podcasting, what is the most spine-chilling story that you've ever come across? And where can our listeners find it in its entirety?
One called the Roadhouse Saloon, and it is in the back catalog of my Plus Club, but it's also probably the easiest and expanded version is over on YouTube, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jim Harold. And it's called, I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's called, did she enter another dimension? And that story, I got to tell you, that's an all-time favorite. I'm really, that is one that's worthy of the Twilight Zone. It really is. So that's the one I would recommend if somebody wants to hear the wildest story. And I could tell it here, but, and I'm glad to do that if you want me to, but to get the full flavor of it and get the visuals and some of the pictures that go along with it, that's over at my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jim Harold.
Let's hear the teaser for it.
Okay. So basically the idea is this. My caller, T.I., she was in the American state of Wisconsin, went with a friend to see a band. And if we're just doing the teaser, I'll just say this. They went to see the band. They were coming back home. They ended up in another bar, and T.I. and her friend barely escaped with possibly getting sucked into some alternate strange reality. So that's the teaser.
Definitely going to check that out after this show tonight
before
I fall asleep.
Yeah, that's that one. That's really one. And the thing is that I had done it as an audio story on the show, and I believe the storyteller. And most storytellers who call in, I believe they're telling the truth. Then I went to meet her and take a camera person with me because I wanted to get a video on it because it was such a compelling story. And honestly, I am more convinced than ever. Absolutely telling the truth. And it is literally like something out of the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I find the topic of these sort of like either another dimension or a time slip absolutely fascinating. There's quite a few in the UK, actually. I suppose they call them time slips, but it could be also entering another dimension. The story of a few cadets that wandered into a village and it was just desolate and it didn't look right. It looked too old and there was no one around, and they just had a weird feeling. And and they said there's no wind blowing. And then either they go back the way. I think that they ended up going through the village. And then things slowly start to turn back to normal. But those sort of stories, they really fascinate me.
Yeah, there's one we had that reminds me of. It was a woman who called in and talked about when she was a kid, and her and her friends used to play out in the woods behind their houses. So they were out playing in the woods, and they looked and they saw a clearing, and there was an old house there. And they don't remember ever seeing it before. And they noticed there was this woman and a little boy who was dressed like an old time clothing, like knee pants and stuff. And the little boy kept looking at them. It was from a distance. And thought, boy, that is weird. And then the mom pulled the boy inside really quickly. I thought, man, that was weird. So a couple of weeks later, they said, you know what? Let's go check out that old house. Let's see what that's all about. So her and her friends go to the spot and they walk over to where the house was. And there's part of a house, the old foundation of a house that's obviously been torn down for many years. Did they see back in time? I don't know. Another similar story, and this one I love. This young woman was up in Vermont, our New England states, one of our New England states here in America, was going to college, and she was driving because it was about an hour from her home, and it was evening class. It was winter, it was dark, and it was cold. So anyway, this is before cell phones really took off. So her car stalled out on the freeway, And she's like, well, I can't just sit here. I got to do something. So she gets out and she notices that there appears to be a gas station, or what you would call a petrol station over there, down on the road below. So she like climbs through all these bushes and stuff and goes down to the place. And she goes in, and the guy at the counter, she says, I need some help. My car's up on the road. I'm stalled. I've got no way back home, and I'm an hour from home or whatever. And can you help me? He said, well, we're about to close 5 to 8, but the owner lives next door. Maybe he can help you. So anyway, like, he just shows up. She doesn't know how he shows up, but he's just there, and he's in coveralls and like work clothes. And she told him the situation. Can you help me? He was an older gentleman. And he's like, yeah, sure, of course. Let me walk up to the road with you. And he went and with his flashlight and his tools and looked at the car. And he said, well, I know what's wrong with the car, but I can't do anything with it now. But I can give you a tow since you're far away from home. Is there a garage close to your house? And she gave him a place, and it was like it was 30, 40 minutes from where they were at. And he said, no problem. He takes her there to drop off the car and says, can I take you home? And that's another 20 minutes. And she's like, well, that's very nice of you. He said, no problem. Takes him home, asks for $20, which is really nothing for all of that bother, all of that work. And he said, well, just let your family know everything's going to be okay. There's not going to be any problems. Everything will be okay with you in the car. And she thought that was kind of weird. So she goes in and just can't believe how nice this guy was. So a couple days later, she's gotten her car fixed, and that's all taken care of. She's going out shopping with her friends, and they're going out generally in that direction of that service station. And she says, you know what, let's drive by there. I want to show you where that really nice older man helped me out. He was such a nice guy. And they drive by it, and it's totally abandoned, and it looks like it's been closed up for 20 years. Who was he? What happened? I don't know. But again, I get a lot of people all over the world, the United States, of course. Yesterday, I had a call from Australia, one from New Zealand, one from the UK. But I believe these people are really telling the truth, and they're being very honest and just telling me their strange experiences. And it's led me to believe the world is a far stranger place than we give it credit for.
I heard another cool story of a time slip recently it's a brand new BBC show here in the UK, actually. It's called Uncanny. So if anyone wants to check it out. But yeah, they do, I'm sure you've heard of it. But
yes.
Yeah, they do some investigation into a story of a couple of people that had a crazy time slip experience where everything around them turned into a 1940s aesthetic. So like cars, people, everything in the shops just turned, everything just looked like it was kind of 1940s. Yeah, it's crazy stuff, and that's definitely worth checking out for anyone that's not heard of it.
Actually, I'm going to be talking to the host, Danny Robbins, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be talking to him in the next couple of weeks for the shows, one of the shows, my show, the Paranormal Podcast. So really interested to get to speak with him. It reminds me of multiple stories we've had. One of my favorites was a young man. He called in, he's probably in his 20s. And he was told the story of when he was 6 years old. He's walking through his hallway by his kitchen in the family home he grew up, all through his teenage years. And he looks up and looks into the kitchen, and there's this, looks like a man or figure wearing a black hoodie, making what appeared to be a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So he runs away, and, he's 6 years old. Like, what in the world was that? So fast forward about 10 years later, this same boy who's now grown up to be, a teenager, he's in the kitchen, he's dressed in his black hoodie, and he's minding his own business, making himself a nice peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And all of a sudden he looks out in the hall, and like this little boy-like figure runs by and runs away. He saw himself in both directions, from the future and from the past. And I have multiple stories like that. So I do believe there's the ability, and I don't know how it works or what it is, but I believe there is a glitch in the matrix. And somehow, some way, I don't know how it works, but some way I think that we can have these glitches where we see in the past or we see in the future. I think and sometimes I'm wondering if ghosts not all the time, but some of the times aren't necessarily the dead, but they're people from the future or past, and we're just getting that glimpse.
So what do you think this experience we're having as human beings is?
I don't know.
The age-old question, isn't it? That's why we do this.
I mean, that's the ultimate cop-out answer, I guess. But I guess what I would say is, I do think it hints at, as I said before, whether there's a scientific explanation for this. Some people might think we're living in a simulation, and it's like a glitch in a computer game, right? Yeah, I mean, everybody knows whatever their favorite computer game is, video game. If you go on the forums and stuff, people will talk about, well, if you go here, you'll run into these non-playable characters, or you could go through this doorway and you're not supposed to. There's an Easter egg, or there's a glitch where you can go somewhere you're not supposed to. And I wonder, if we're all a simulation, is it a glitch? Is it bad programming? I mean, I think that the answer is a lot weirder than we maybe even can conceptualize. So I really believe reality is, like, we see what we see as we go through life every day, but I don't think that tells the whole tale. I think there's a lot more going on, and it's just beyond the surface, and we can't necessarily see it.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of the film The Matrix, I remember the first time I watched that, I probably shouldn't have watched it. I was probably too young, but when as over the years I watched it again, and you just see it with sort of like a fresh sort of like pair of eyes, and it's just a lot of it's down to sort of like perceptions. Like, it depends on how open-minded you are to the things around you, because, like, when I was young, I was very naive. I used to believe everything that everyone told me. I think, well, I don't lie. Why would anyone else sort of like want to lie, sort of thing? And you can quickly you can grow up to be in a bubble, but when that bubble bursts, it's really uncomfortable. But there's so many things, like people having, like, for instance, they've banged their head, and all of a sudden they're like genius mathematicians, or they. Yeah, it's crazy how they unlock something.
Isn't that weird? Yeah.
Or speak another language.
Yeah, exactly. Where did that come from? No, that's why I'm saying is that, it might be science, but it might be the science of the 26th century. I think it was Arthur C. Clarke that said something like, advanced enough, paraphrasing, advanced enough technology is indistinguishable from magic. You would show an iPhone to a caveman, they would think, oh my God. And, you show them like the little picture of flame, like a lighter you'd use at a concert. You would think, oh, it's evil. But that's just technology. So, I mean, is it technology? Is it just science we don't understand? I don't know. And the thing is that, I don't know that we're going to have the answers by the time I'm off the scene. I hope they have the answers by the time you guys are. I hope you get to see that, but it's still fun asking the question. And there's so many different explanations, and maybe one or more of them are true at the same time. Who knows?
So we've briefly covered the meaning of life, glitches in the Matrix. So, taking a short detour before we move on to ghosts, what are your thoughts on the recent UFO hearings in the US?
Well, first of all, I believe my general thought on UFOs is that, a large percentage of them are people who are mistaken. Then there's my least favorite, the hoaxers. There's people who make stuff up, obviously. Then you've got some of it, and it's, I think, a good proportion. It's either some kind of military craft, or, a Starlink satellite or something in the sky that people are not lying about, but they're misinterpreting it as something that it's not, when there's a perfectly good explanation. But then there's that few percent that can't be explained in any of those categories. And I definitely think there is something, whether it's extraterrestrial, which most of us kind of default to, like, oh, it's aliens, which it might be, or is it interdimensional? That could be too. Could it be time travelers? I don't know. And could it be, from the deep recesses of the earth? You think about these, not UFOs, but USOs, submersible transmedium craft that go from air to the sea, maybe they're going to sea bases or something. Who knows? I mean, but again, I think there's something very weird. And I think with the hearings, I was very, at the time, I was very ready to be disappointed. I watched the hearings. I was actually very excited and very surprised. And you had, it's kind of like you have conservative and labor over there. We have Republican and Democrat. And there was a Republican congressman who sat right on the panel and said that there had been a multi-decade cover-up, which I thought was huge, coming from a congressman sitting on the panel saying there's been a multi-decade cover-up. I thought that should be headlines, which it wasn't. And you had a Democrat, which is like Labor in the UK, Democrat saying that it was time for disclosure. And I really love seeing that bipartisan spirit, because we never see that in the States anymore. Everything is so polarized, unfortunately. So I thought, this is great. This is going to really break it open and so forth. And then there were efforts to, wherever they came from, to discredit the whistleblower David Grush, who said that he had information and had been told from reliable sources that the U.S. was in possession of non-human craft. So actually, I went from being very excited to kind of like, well, here we go again. And I think the public's attention to all this kind of thing is very short-lived. It's like something can happen, and for a day or two, everybody's interested, and then they get back to paying their mortgage, going to their job, and it's kind of forgotten about. And I think I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do think within the U.S. government, there are multiple factions. Most of the time when we talk about the government as it relates to UAPs, we think, well, the government, like it's one thing, like it's a monolith. And I don't believe that. I believe that the government has factions, just like any organization. If you've ever worked for a company, there's people who like other people and don't like other people. And some people have one agenda for the company and some people have another. I think the government's exactly the same way. I think you have some very, very powerful people who are in that camp that has been with the government so long that said, we know things and that's for us to know and the public doesn't need to know, and we're going to keep a tight lid on that. And I think that's a large percentage of the government that has an impact on this. And then I think there's a portion who is now saying, let's start to let the truth out. That doesn't mean you give away every national security secret or anything like that. I understand the need for defense security and national security, but that if the U.S. government is in possession of non-human craft, the people should know. That doesn't mean you put their blueprints of how it's made and the technology used, but people should know. And I think there's people who want to get that kind of information out, whatever the government knows, within reason. And then there's people who want to keep a tight lid on it. And my guess right now is the people that want to keep a tight lid on it are still winning after all of these decades. That's my read of it.
Yes, it's a shame that really, as you say, we don't need to know everything, but we all pay taxes to the government, and honestly, we're not all children, and I think we are entitled to learn or to at least know some things and not be like spoon-fed tiny little bits like, oh, there might be a microbe on this planet here, and it's what. It's just yeah.
I mean, too many, and again, I go back to very similar campfire stories. I also say keep an open mind, but not so open your brains fall out. But I believe, for example, with campfire, nobody gets paid to tell their stories. There's really no fame in it. I'm a podcast, a popular podcast, but it's a podcast. It's not like anybody is going to end up on national television or a media star by telling their story to me. And I think the vast majority of people are very, very sincere. And I feel that way. There are very credible people who have had very strange UFO sightings. Former President Jimmy Carter, for one. Another one, former President Ronald Reagan, I believe when he was governor of California. So there we got somebody from each side of the aisle. And one of the most compelling ones that I ever heard was a pilot who actually had been the pilot for former President Obama's campaign plane before he became president. And you've got to believe, if you are carrying around a major presidential candidate, a nominee for the Democratic nominee for president of the United States, and somebody running for president of the United States one step away, those pilots have to be cleared to the nth degree and all kinds of security checks. So obviously this guy was very level-headed. And he told the story when he was a young pilot that he was not piloting, but I think he was acting as navigator or first officer or something in a flight. And they saw an incredible UFO sighting. But I believe, if I remember correctly, and it's been several years ago, I heard about this, not through my show, somewhere else, that actually he was told, and this is before the Obama involvement, he said, just keep quiet, And I believe a lot of that goes on. I think that people see things and they're afraid to speak out because they'll be ridiculed. In the case of pilots or military, maybe their career will be hurt. But I think they're definitely very smart people, very credible people who report seeing UFOs, and they should be taken seriously.
What if the government aren't telling us just because we're actually just probably livestock to the aliens, and they're just abducting us and eating us?
I'm not that. At least for me, my theory is not that far out there. I mean, could it be? Could it be like that old Twilight Zone To Serve Man? If you remember that one, that was a classic. It's a cookbook. It's a cookbook. Don't go. But the thing is that, there's a couple things. First of all, let's say that the U.S. did make contact of some type with the aliens in the 40s or 50s, which many people theorize is the case. There's even theories out there, and I'm not saying I agree with them, that President Eisenhower met with aliens. I don't know if I believe that, but that is a theory that's out there. But let's say that the U.S. knows and has been in contact with aliens. If we've been in contact with them for the last 60, 70 years, if they wanted to kill us, wouldn't they have killed us by now? On the other hand, there's people that say, hey, you talk about the aliens like they're a monolith. Maybe there are multiple species of aliens. Maybe they're good aliens and the bad aliens. And then here's the example that I always think of. What if they're just indifferent? Let me give you an example. Let's say that there is a big, in the States, we do have a real habit of this. Over in the UK, you keep things for many hundreds of years. It's beautiful, and you rehabilitate things and so forth. We just rip things down and build new, right? Because we have to make more money. So, something that's very nice, maybe 70, 80 years old, they just rip it down to build up the new shopping center or whatever. But let's say that there's a big anthill, okay? And they're going to clear this land and they're going to build a big shopping center here in the States. Do they go, we really shouldn't do that because that anthill there has a whole civilization going on. We shouldn't really disturb that. No, bring in the bulldozers. Well, think if the aliens are so much smarter than us than we are, the ants, and they want to build a superhighway through and Earth is in the way, they could just say, there goes that little anthill. That was kind of interesting, So maybe the scary thing is actually not if they hate us, but what if they're just indifferent? What if they're apathetic? Not good.
Yeah, not good at all. I mean, who knows really? And if there are those sort of like species out there, hopefully they don't ever bump into us. But I do think that I don't know anything. I haven't got any proof, but I do think that there are races out there that probably are in talks with deep government and keeping like an eye on us.
Yes,
because there's so many things like in terms of our technology.
Oh my God, I say this all the time.
How it jumped so massively, and
why we can't go back to the moon. we could do it in 1969, but we can't do it now.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting question, but
they threw that technology away, didn't they?
but I'll give you an example. Like I'm in my early 50s, so I'm ancient compared to you guys. When I grew up, we had one phone in the house. It was a black telephone with a dial. You know, we're talking a museum piece, right? Now I've got the iPhone Pro Max in front of me, and, you know, I can communicate with anybody in the world. I can text anybody in the world. I can video with anybody in the world. It's instantaneous communication. And you talked about, you know, Apollo in 1969. This phone would crush anything that they had in terms of computing power, just make it look like a tinker toy. So I guess what I'm saying is that really seemed to happen post World War II. I mean, if you look at stuff that was made in the 30s and the 40s, I mean, it might have been 200 years ago. It's so backward, and God bless the people who were able to make that technology work and win things like World War II and do the great things they did. We stand on the shoulders of giants. It's not to belittle them in any way. But how we got to where we were in 1945 at the end of the Second World War to where we are in 2023, less than 100 years later, man on the moon, all of the crazy stuff that we can do now, not to even mention a whole new thing that's coming up now, AI, which it's its own existential question. But how did that happen so fast? How did it accelerate so fast? Isn't there some kind of X factor? Did we reverse engineer something? I wonder.
Yeah, it's the same with me. I think that it's probably a strong possibility that did happen. Not that we may never know in our lifetimes,
Right.
but I'm sure when they release the files in 200 years' time,
Exactly.
everyone might know that. Yeah,
exactly. Yep. And I mean, I hope that we're leaning towards disclosure. I mean, again, I think the people have a right to know. And I think if it were handled the right way, and who knows with our governments, the way they handle things, but if it were handled the right way, I think people could accept it. People can, you know, the whole world was locked down in 2020, and a lot of damage was done, but we survived it, and people survived, you know, wars. And I think people are survivors and are capable of dealing with, you know, big paradigm shifts. So I don't think we would just all fall to pieces if we were told this information. I think that's kind of a cop-out by the people who wouldn't want us to know that information.
Well, I think a lot of governments and elite believe that they're kind of above most people,
Yeah.
and think that we're just dumb and yeah, not sure how we'll react to it, and think we can't process the information.
Right.
Your ghost story. Your ghost story.
Ladies and gentlemen, hope you've enjoyed listening to part 1 of our fascinating conversation diving into the mind of Jim Harold. Hope you will join us next week, where we change up the subject and talk ghosts, haunted objects, and hear the story of a ghost bar fight. Until then.